Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Why No One Plays. We have reached over 50 episodes in this series as of late, and it's been quite an adventure. I've been on this for going on almost 2 years now, and I've seen a lot of older episodes on champs who used to be irrelevant get a lot more exposure over time. At the very top of the playlist, there used to be a video on Rumble, which I actually made far before I did anyone else. But even before that, I made an episode on REMADE and Asol, which I remade since then because I felt like the video at the time didn't do enough justice. Sadly for the mech riding Yordle, his standing hasn't really gone anywhere either since 2018, apart from a couple months in early last year after his changes. With that in mind, I think it's about time we update his video to match that of other episodes. So without further ado, let's talk about Rumble, the Mechanized Menace. Rumble is one of the very few champions who is considered an AP bruiser. Usually when you hear the term bruiser, you would picture the fighter class, more specifically juggernauts. They have a lot of bulk and damage output, but have poor range and or mobility if any at all. As you can see from the list on screen, the majority of juggernauts are physical damage dealers. Aatrox, Darius, even Dr. Mundo to an extent, Garen, Alawi, Nasus, so on and so forth. AP melee champions as a whole are few and far between even to this day. Those that do exist are either assassins or skirmishers, and let's be real, they're only nominally melee as they all have ways to completely nullify a ranged champion's advantage with the press of a button. Next to Mordekaiser, Rumble is pretty much the only true AP bruiser in the game, yet even that would be a stretch considering most of the time you see him building full AP. He's got an interesting set of tools that can be used for a surprisingly wide number of situations, and on top of that, his abilities would suggest he's more than capable of matching ranged opponents blow for blow despite his melee status. It sounds a little intriguing that Rumble can wear so many hats and go into so many roles, yet still barely find widespread usage over the past few years. Take a look at his popularity history since 2015. Ever since a sharp decline in his normal pick rate around late Season 7, early Season 8, he's been gradually losing steam, becoming meta-relevant twice between then and now, but only for a short period of time. This kind of behavior would only suggest Rumble is popular to use when he's overtuned and discarded otherwise, meaning he doesn't have the most loyal player base out there. Usually when a champion has a long-running history of success in the meta that rapidly falls apart, it's due to a major change in their kit's design, such as a rework or loss of a playstyle that was the defining weapon of their gameplay. An example of this would be Rakan. He was well known for his lightning fast engage through his ultimate and grand entrance when used in conjunction with Flash. Basically, it was a very far distance guaranteed 2-second lockdown. As a result, he was able to enjoy quite a bit of presence in the first 2 years of his career. Then came patch 9.9 when he was locked out of using grand entrance or Flash for half a second after using the quickness. That's the update that ultimately killed widespread usage of him in both solo queue and pro play. For Rumble, there's a similar force at play here. Between 2015 and 2017, the guy was a staple top laner, a solid choice for AP, and was also easy to pick up and pretty fun to use if I do say so myself. And there was a playstyle he was well known for in a similar fashion to Rakan. Rumble's passive is Junkyard Titan. Instead of expending mana or some other resource, usage of his basic abilities would heat up his engine. When above 50 heat, he enters the danger zone, empowering those basic abilities to be 50% stronger in every attribute. Flame Spitter would do 50% more damage, Scrap Shield gave him 50% more shield and 50% more speed, Electro Harpoon did 50% more damage, slowed and shredded magic resist for 50% more. But when he maxed out, he would overheat, causing him to deal bonus damage with his basic attacks at the cost of locking himself out of using any further abilities for a little over 5 seconds. During that time, his heat bar would reset back to 0. Prior to patch 7.12, the way Rumble's passive worked allowed you to gradually build up heat using only one ability, normally your Flame Spitter or Scrap Shield. This allowed you to effectively start laning phase with an empowered Q. And just in case you're not familiar with Rumble's enhanced flamethrower stats, take a look at this. Yeah, level 1, over 300 damage in one ability. Of course back then the base numbers weren't that high, it was only about 150 or so, but it had a base cooldown of 6 seconds as opposed to the current 10. Rumble was a notorious lane bully up top. His high damage output, compounded by being a manaless champion who had access to a low cooldown shield, made him very difficult to trade against in the early game. He could enjoy a relatively comfortable laning phase before transitioning into the mid game and destroying everyone with his powerful ultimate. But with that playstyle gone, Rumble lost his core win condition and spent the past 5 years or so not really knowing where to go next. There were times when Riot saw fit to give him a bit of a tune-up. We saw him pop up in the jungle and then in mid lane, but both times he was nerfed almost immediately as they quickly realized he was a little too good at his job. Whenever he wasn't, his popularity would drop significantly as people would only use him for freelo and not much else. That's because Rumble is very counterintuitive to play. Maybe not Asol levels of counterintuitive, but pretty high up there. Rumble is quite literally the only champion in all of League who does not improve in combat tempo over the course of a game. As you put more points into your abilities, get more items, and go further and further into a match, your champion's uptime improves in some way, lower cooldowns, more resources, higher attack speed, what have you. Such is not the case for Rumble, as his heat generation, cooling, and so on remain exactly the same from level 1 to 18. No items to full build. Lack of natural progression of combat tempo creates a disconnect in user experience, which is jarring for many players. Rumble's passive closely resembles the empowered ability systems that Renekton and Rengar have. By using your basic abilities, you eventually get access to stronger versions of them, and so your playstyle is geared towards using those abilities as much as possible. Given that they don't use mana, it's all the more reason for you to itemize as much ability haste as humanly possible. Not the case for this guy. Unlike other champions with empowered abilities, Rumble can't spam his abilities like crazy. In fact, by doing so, you can inadvertently lock yourself out of using any at all. At best, he can only use each basic ability's empowered version once. Flame Spitter and Scrap Shield both generate 20 heat, and each Electro Harpoon generates 10 heat, although Rumble is able to toss out a second one within 3 seconds of his initial cast if done so prior to overheating. Basically, he has a hard cap to his abilities. He can never and will never be allowed to use more than each ability once in a given fight without overheating himself. At first, it may seem like Rumble's heat is no different from energy champions, seeing as they also can't fire all their guns at once and have to space their attacks out to let their energy recharge. But there are two key differences between energy users and Rumble. The first is persistent regeneration. Energy recovers at a consistent pace. Any point it's not at max, it goes up by increments of 10 per second, barring presence of mind or blue buff. This happens whether you are or aren't consuming energy during that time. Rumble's heat does not start decaying until 4 seconds after using a basic ability. Each time you use an ability, that timer resets. In other words, for you to initiate the cooling period, you have to not use any abilities at all for 4 seconds and then wait even more for his heat to drop down a bit. The second is on-demand energy regeneration. Each energy champion has some way of forcibly restoring energy to allow them to maintain their uptime in combat. As an example, Lee Sin's Flurry restores energy with each auto attack after casting an ability. So if you string together a few attacks in between your rotation, you won't really lose out on a whole lot of uptime. Even then, his energy costs decrease over the course of a game. Now, I don't know how to incorporate on-demand cooling in Rumble's kit, but it is one thing he lacks. So, while he has very low base cooldowns in his kit, they're instead imposed on him in a different way, and unlike cooldowns, Rumble doesn't cool off faster or generate less heat with each ability by purchasing ability haste. You have to be more conservative with your ability usage on Rumble than you would on literally any other character, but that can feel smothering to a lot of players. With enough practice, you may be able to get the hang of it, but the majority of players don't like being tethered to that kind of restriction. By that logic, why bother playing Rumble when you can play Mordekaiser or Sylas, who don't have a hard limit to their cooldowns, thus allowing them to inflict as much damage as their abilities can allow. On the subject of damage, that brings me to the next issue about him. If there's one thing Rumble is good at doing, it's damage. In fact, his burst damage is quite terrifying given that he's a battle mage, the subclass more suited for persistent damage. But what makes him far less consistent than his peers is that he has to go all in, it's not an option for him. For him to exert the full force of his pressure, Rumble has to overheat, since that grants him bonus attack speed and % max health damage on hit. If you miscalculate your damage, aim your ultimate incorrectly, accidentally overheat without getting your shield off or something, you're essentially a free kill for 5 seconds. Rumble can't exactly afford to wait for his heat to go down in a team fight, thus you have to hope your initial attack does enough damage to either win the fight or put the enemy team in disadvantage so that they're more concerned about running away than punishing you while you're overheated. To his credit, if you play him well, that's almost a guarantee. Flame Spitter's enhanced damage is higher than that of some ultimates, I'm not kidding, look at it. 510 base plus 165 AP ratio, that's basically ultimate levels of damage. 2 rounds of Electro Harpoon is 480 plus 120% AP while shredding a single enemy's magic resist by 30%. And of course, let's not forget the Equalizer. It's a super ultimate with an inordinate cast range and staggering damage output. Make no mistake, just his ultimate alone is enough to single-handedly win a team fight. Rumble is more than capable of smoking the enemy team, so while in a given fight he has only one shot, if you land that shot, it's free low. However, unlike other champions with an all-in combo such as Annie or Vex, Rumble has no hard crowd control or lockdown to his name. His 2 main damaging abilities do inflict pretty serious damage, but over the course of a long period of time. Unless the enemy team is either stupid enough or forced to stand in his Equalizer and Flamethrower for the full duration, they're not actually taking 2000 base damage and 330% AP. Rumble is only able to sufficiently guarantee his damage if he has team support, like a J4 ultimate or Veigar cage that can keep everyone stuck in place long enough. By himself, many can simply disengage from him. In that sense, he's dependent on his teammates to set him up for high damage and protect him while he's overheated. In all actuality, Rumble is only considered a battle mage in light of the short range on his basic abilities and high area coverage. Practically speaking, he's more of a burst mage. Personally, I don't think it's very accurate to say he has the same consistent damage output as a Ryze, Anivia, Victor, or Talia. The last major problem with Rumble is that he's a melee champion with no mobility, yet doesn't have the same intrinsic durability that a champion with his parameters should have. Needing to be right up in his opponent's face leaves him wide open to counterattack, and when combined with his passive heat mechanic, he has a very weird neutral game that ironically makes him weaker against melee champions than ranged, despite Juggernauts being the kings of close quarters combat. The reason Rumble has such a hard time in top lane yet myrtleizes people in mid lane is that he's closer to Sylas or Echo than he is to Mordekaiser and Gwen. The former two are better suited for quick burst trades or hit and run maneuvers, the latter two, while also decent at chipping you down, are at their strongest in all-in fights. What makes Mordekaiser so deadly in a head-on confrontation? For starters, Darkness Rise is a persistent damage aura that can rack up a ton of damage over the course of a fight, especially late game when it does 5% max health damage per second. Then his Obliterate does 1.6 times damage when hitting only one target, and Indestructible can grant him a potential 30% max HP shield. Rumble doesn't have the same built-in damage as other fighters. He's very contingent on building ability power thanks to his amazing AP scaling. You don't really have the luxury to build tank items on him. I mean, you can try. Hextech Rocket Belt and Shadow Flame both give health. Sonya's Hourglass has seen better days, but it's still usable. In his defense, Scrap Shield is definitely good against chip damage. 6-second cooldown and good absorption, especially when empowered. But seeing as that's the last ability you max, the only scaling you get from it is through AP. Comparatively, Mordekaiser's shield is 30% max health at level 1 and scales off of health, so he gets more defensive value out of health and AP items like Demonic Embrace than Rumble. Against a lot of top laners who can dish out as much damage as they take, Rumble stands very little chance, and his lack of mobility or hard CC makes him vulnerable to rushdown types like Renekton, Tryndamere, Kled, Riven, and Irelia to name a few. As such, he's been forced into the jungle and mid lane where he can use overheating to his advantage and clear camps quickly, or against squishy and immobile mid laners who lose half their health off of one empowered Q. That said, there's a million other AP melee champions who do the same thing. Fizz, Kassadin, Diana, Sylas, and they're all more flexible in different situations. There's just too much holding Rumble down that the only time the general player base wants to use him is if his numbers are overtuned enough to ignore those deficiencies. For example, what caused his meteoric yet ephemeral rise in mid-season 11 was the changes to his passive, which took out a little bit of base damage and funneled it into max health damage plus an additional 50% bonus attack speed for free. On top of that, they made his E-Shred magic resistance. Pretty serious buffs at no cost. But that's how strong Rumble has to be to offset how clunky and suffocating he is to play. Back in seasons 5 to 7, he was popular because you could manage his heat a lot better. It decayed much earlier back then and at a different rate, thus allowing you to maintain it by using only one ability as opposed to two. People would spam Scrap Shield to hold themselves in the danger zone so that way they were ready for a fight to break out. Now, you have to use two abilities to hold that temperature, at least until you got cooldown reduction. Rumble is a really fun champion with an interesting gimmick, and if used correctly he can easily carry games, but the changes to his heat mechanic ultimately turned him into a stat checker in some ways. He's just not as consistent as he used to be. They did bring in some new stuff since then, like the buffs to his passive and magic resist shred on his E, but none of those really made up for how much less leg room he has to work with. Honestly, he's one of the few champs that make me scratch my head as to why they made those changes in the first place. Even back then, he wasn't the most oppressive top laner out there. I mean, yeah, his presence in pro play was quite high, but I didn't see too many people complaining about him being super annoying to deal with. If memory serves, the intent behind patch 7.12 was to add more skill expression to Rumble, when in reality all it did was reduce how much skill you can express because they shifted so much power out of his neutral game and into his all-in combo. But he's a battle mage, he's kinda supposed to have a strong neutral. Then again, how would we even scale Junkyard Titan anyway? We can't just say make him cool off faster because that would force him to burn more abilities just to hold above 50 heat. Increasing his maintenance cost does mean you can attack more, but it also means you have to micromanage it more. On the other hand, adding on-demand cooling is also counterintuitive as Rumble wants to stay above 50 heat. If hypothetically Scrap Shield was changed to cool you down, that may seem appealing at first until you realize now you have only two abilities that generate heat. It's so weird. Similarly to how Asol has two dead zones being too close and too far, Rumble also has two dead zones, too cold and too hot. It makes for an interesting champion, not so much a popular one. Anyways, that's gonna wrap it up for today. For those of you who watched my original episode on Rumble, I hope this one was better. If you enjoyed the video though, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Consider following me on Twitter, joining my Discord server, and checking out my previous Why No One Plays episodes if you haven't yet. But until next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.